planning Ruby's birthday party. Are we on? I can move those for.
Sam's dad.
They were quite tasty. They got me through that meeting.
They're so good. No, they're so here.
No.
No, girl,
Not offensive.
not offensive at all. No, true. They are. Yeah. All right. Are you ready to start?
We are ready to start.
Okay, I guess we'll call this meeting to order. And we don't have to, no pledge allegiance or anything. Do we say that?
No, we do not.
Okay, so roll call, I guess, and it's just me.
Councilmember Middleton is attending.
There's three participants.
Councilmember Dundon.
Okay.
Let me just double check the participants.
Okay, listen. I like that.
There you go. Councilmember Dundon and Councilmember Kavanaugh are
Okay.
also in.
Awesome. And then I guess we can get started. So the discussion is for RL 24-136. It's an ordinance to repeal 292 noise ordinance, the city charter code and ordinance program. Let's we'll start there. So I had a few questions. Can you guys hear?
They can't speak without us specifically.
Okay.
And because
There's
this is a webinar and not.
Somebody in the Q&A. If somebody's asking a question.
How is everyone?
Oh, good. Okay, so I had a few questions in chapter 292. I don't know if you have a copy of that, Megan, and okay. So this one, it's there's a part for the definitions, and it was just it says administrator means the chief of police or designee. So I had a question, like, why is that? And would there be like other people assigned to that?
Can I, please? I don't know if I have to identify myself, or I usually have a name like Sophie Bergman, Corporation Counsel. And on the agenda, I see we have RL 24-136 and 137 separated out, but it's essentially the same thing.
Okay.
Just for clarity for the public that may be watching.
Okay.
We're repealing and replacing, that was the proposal. So essentially, this would replace our current noise ordinance, which would be enforced like any other ordinance. So like open container, riding a bicycle on a sidewalk, any violation of our local code. Typically, the police, if there is an alleged violation and the police have, appropriate information, they will issue a ticket on that, and that will go to city court. So while it says that the chief of police is administrating it, it means enforcing it just like any other violation of our local code. However, they would just issue the ticket. The whoever it's issued to would still get their normal due process through the court system. The ticket would go up to Binghamton City Court. The person would be directed to appear for arraignment at, whatever date is designated by the court. And then the judge would make the ultimate decision. So they would still, like I said, have their due process, get arraigned, have the right to a trial, have the right to discovery. And then if they're found guilty, the judge would then impose a fine and sentence.
So I'll go back to that because I have some questions about the due process of that. So basically, it's just to replace kind of what was already what's supposed to be enforced.
Yeah, and typically the police are the one issuing, they get a complaint about whatever it is, in this case, noise, they will investigate it. If whatever they responded to met the definition of a violation of this proposed noise ordinance, they would then issue them a citation.
Okay.
And it just says the police chief administrates it because they're the ones in charge of enforcing it, meaning issuing a citation. But like any other citation that's issued by the police, it would then go to city court.
Okay, and the next one is and the definitions, D. It says best practical noise measures means, so do we plan on getting a device to measure that? Or like, I'm just nervous, like for instance, I live on Rugby on the west side, right? I wasn't in town, but my husband was there and he was playing music in the backyard. And it was like 6 o'clock and someone from around the corner that lives on Prairie came and knocked on our door. I wasn't home because it probably would have been nasty. Like, I'm like, don't knock on my door. But how would we know? Like, how would we measure that? And what if someone just said that? Like, I'm always worried about like kind of this vague of it because it's like such a, complex issue. But I've had that done to me recently at 6 o'clock, like in the backyard playing music. Like,
well, I think so. The proposed revision essentially outlines 11 factors for the police to take into consideration if they're called to respond to a noise complaint. I think for noise control measures, I mean, I don't want to speak for anybody, but if there's a complaint about somebody playing a stereo, I'm dating myself here, at volume that's too loud, a noise control measure would be to turn the volume down. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know. But if that was the question or.
Yeah, how would we the best practical noise measures? Like, what does that mean? Like, so I'm confused by that.
So it says any device or method which reduces the generation or transmission of noise and determined to be feasible. So like in a simplistic example, if it's a stereo and it's playing too loudly, they could theoretically be like, just turn the noise down.
Would you get a ticket? Like, so would you be ticketed for that? So that's
I think it would have to be on a case by case basis, just like the police do now, and evaluating these 11 factors to determine whether there has been a violation of the ordinance or not.
We have a couple of questions. I'm just gonna.
Go ahead. Yeah, can you,
Yep. Councilmember Kavanaugh asks, what about code enforcement being able to enforce or the dog warden being able to enforce?
I mean, typically when it comes to enforcement of these local code violations, the calls are generated, people call the police, right? That's how they typically get generated. And then the police would go out and investigate it. Like with anything, open container or riding a bicycle on a sidewalk. Noise is kind of the same complaint driven issue.
And I would just add to that, if Councilman Kavanaugh is asking, like, could code enforcement inspectors also respond to noise complaints? Like Sophie said, it's the police department that responds, but I think like the workload that code enforcement has right now wouldn't really allow them to take on an additional load of responding to noise complaints. And that's one of the things that I think this new law addresses.
And the animal control officer, who is part of the police department.
That was the second half of the question.
I think it would just depend on the scope of her, like with code too, it would depend on the scope of their job duties. So like, code typically investigates, violations of the property maintenance code and, safety issues, unsafe structures, stuff like that. Like, does it fall within the performance of their job duties? So, I mean, the animal control officer, we could look into whether a very loud animal, might be subject to this noise control ordinance. Is certainly something we could look into if that's within the scope of her job.
Well, there is a provision.
Yeah, no, that's why I mentioned that.
Councilmember Dunn asks, who determines what is too loud and how do they determine it? Based off what they consider personally as too loud, what decibel is too loud?
So this would eliminate the necessity of using a decibel meter, which has to be calibrated, and is, you know, that generates obviously a lot of work and isn't.
It would be basically discretion.
Well, there's 11 factors that are outlined here, and this is based on a model from Syracuse that's also been cross-referenced with Rochester. So there are 11 different factors. So, and it would have to be on a case-by-case basis, depending on what the noise is, the duration of the noise, where it is, the time of day. You know, there may be a distinction between something at noon versus something at 3 a.m. But I think those factors are things that are meant to be taken into consideration.
The factors though are still discretionarily taken into consideration, right? So it's like, there's no like
Yeah, they include, but are not
red,
limited
yellow,
to.
green of what a factor would be considered. Like, it's still personal.
No, no
judgment
one
call.
factor has greater weight than the other. But that's essentially like anything else. It's highly fact specific.
I think in some ways it makes it easier, or more clear cut for residents to understand, where previously we had these readings set for decibel meters and no one really knows, like, well, how loud is this? How many decibels am I hitting? Like the way that this outlines this, I think, like, in the definitions, there's that unnecessary noise, which, it's letter V. That kind of, I think it speaks in more like common sense language. So yeah, there's still discretion, but it's hopefully a little bit clearer and easier for the public to understand.
And that's a great point. You know, I've been looking at it from the enforcement perspective, but this also puts residents on notice of what is or is not permitted, right?
And the other thing I'll say, if I could, is just that, like, I think other council members have run into this issue too, just as we have, and there's like a recognition that the noise ordinance has, has needed some updating. So like, we want this to be a collaboration, and if you guys have ideas or you're hearing specific input from residents, I think that will really help the process, so.
Yeah, and certainly this, like I said, we just took this from Syracuse and Rochester, bigger cities where they've taken a more common sense approach. And it's worked for them, but certainly collaboration is key, as with anything. So if there are any recommended changes, we can certainly look into those too.
I'm just checking.
Do you have any more questions? Oh, yeah, okay.
Alright, so Mike Dunn, Councilmember Dunn says, on a case-by-case basis, how can you be unbiased in using the 11 factors when you have different officers responding to different issues?
I think that's with all violations though, right? That's sort of what they're tasked with.
I mean, it's hard to engage in a hypothetical analysis of like what would happen on a case-by-case basis. I mean, I think there would be, if you are saying you want a much more specific standard, I mean, you can certainly, look to other municipalities and see what they've enacted.
Yeah,
I feel like this.
I think like the big thing is if we are going to find people, we kind of want something not so vague. So that way it's kind of, like something concrete if we're gonna end up getting a fine.
The other thing to go to the councilman's question is, like, ultimately the discretion is resting in the city court judge. So the individual officers would be responding and issuing the tickets, but everyone has the due process that Sophie outlined. So it would ultimately be a city court judge that's, determines if it stands or it's thrown out.
Who relies though on the testimony of the officer?
And the individual though. So whoever is ticketed, they're limited to the same 11 factors too. So like I had said before, they're on notice of the things that the police would be considering, so.
Sorry, the council member also had a comment. No, unlike this open container is pretty cut and dry like most violations, none others use discretion.
I understand.
I just have a question from the clerk's office, so like our questions are, we mainly focus on our own process points, like, because we process noise permits and things like that. The big one is just, so the current process in place is we have noise permits, which permit noise during like events and certain types of things. We have special variance permits from our office, which have certain outlines rules that are the same between the two ordinances, from what I can tell. And then there's the council special use variance, which is removed in this particular, so I just wanted to clarify that that's. Like how we would move going forward, like the council special use would be eliminated.
And the clerks would have full discretion if they decide to do this.
Yeah, so a couple of things, I mean. We just had this come up where we issued a special, or where
Mhm.
council issued a special permit for Eagles,
Mhm.
right? So, I mean, if you wanted to make clear in any new law that this would not be retroactive and not affect any currently issued permits for the year. My understanding is it's every year.
Every year they have to.
So, you know, you could certainly put that in there, that it's not meant to affect any current valid permits that have been issued for the 2024. You know, you could certainly add that in there. It gives the clerk's office discretion to issue one basically every month. You could certainly change that if you felt like it was appropriate to have the discretion to issue one every week or whatever. Those are the points I think of collaboration that we're not best situated to necessarily address in whole, but like through this collaboration, we can certainly amend or add. And then if council wants to retain jurisdiction of that, I mean, that's your prerogative too, if you wanted to add that back in. I don't have any strong feelings about that.
Yeah, just for my own knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I think
How
those are all
permitting will
things
work.
that are really important points of clarification.
Yeah.
And we'd probably want to address before making any of this ready for the vote.
Yeah,
I definitely think that 4-week timeline, we could talk about a little further, just because it did specifically come up in the construction during that last consideration, like the consideration harder.
Yeah, and I just think, you know, it's looking at what you guys have encountered, what makes sense, what's intuitive. And you could always add in language like up to one a week or up to one a month or.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's ways around it based on what you're seeing in like, because we want to make it practical, right? Like, we don't want to make it overly burdensome for residents
Yeah.
to apply for special permits.
yeah, and I think we talked about this with your office, Megan, that like, at least in our office, we've seen more and more of these like repeat events come in, like whether they're bars that are located in the business district or places that are located in maybe other spots where they want to have like repeated weekly events. So if our offices can get together on that, I think that would be helpful. Councilmember Dunn also had another comment off the previous question. An officer still gets to give a ticket, which still forces residents into court based off the officer's discretion.
Well, and I think. I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I mean, I think. Having different. Like 11 different kind of. Factors to look at when you're determining whether there is a violation of this law or not. May make sense if council's uncomfortable with that. You know, certainly we could look to other jurisdictions that use a more concrete definition. Although unfortunately, I think this was the best result that municipalities could find short of using a decibel meter, which isn't practical or which isn't the most practical way to enforce this law.
Do you have anything else?
From what I've seen, maybe give them a second. Sorry, it takes a minute.
No,
Okay,
you're
so
good.
Councilmember Kavanaugh says, it seems that when the current law was adopted, there was a desire to make noise violations more objectively measurable. Does anyone know what that was in response to or what wasn't previously working? Are we going back to a standard that didn't work in the past?
I think this isn't, well. The proposed law in relation to the prior law, I think, brings it more current. And in line with other municipalities who have used similar types of noise ordinances. Because I think the practical reality of using kind of the antiquated decibel meter wasn't the best practice for the city. And it wasn't really but before the current noise
Yeah,
ordinance,
that's why you asked.
I don't know the legislative history of that and when that was enacted in. It was amended in 2010. So I think. That would require some
I
some
think,
digging.
just to jump in, because I've done a lot of research
Yeah,
now on the
sure.
noise ordinance from our own issue. I think Councilmember Kavanaugh, that in 2010, the change was made to clarify the training for officers on, so the 5 officers in the city, which came from 5 different departments. Were trained through a specific program at Rutgers University on how to use a decimeter and how to calibrate it. That's the significant change from the first ordinance that was written in the 70s. So it was like, we have this decimeter equipment, but nobody's trained on it. Like, let's attach a trainer.
And I think that's one of the roadblocks that we've come up against in the years, according to our information, is that that wasn't it, to maintain that level of training and calibration of these various instruments, and then to happen to have somebody on duty to respond to the complaint, you know, if one of the 5 people wasn't on duty at 3 AM, what do you tell residents, you know? So there's that consideration too.
They have more. Start talking about it. They have plenty to.
Yes, so, Councilmember Dunn says. Okay, so cameras are practical to prevent crime, but decibel meters aren't practical here. That seems counterintuitive to me.
I think I just spoke to that. I think it's more of like a practical issue for, you know, if you have 5 people trained and one of them is not working on that particular shift, then you don't have somebody to respond to a resident's complaint. You know, so I think they were looking to try to update that so that you didn't have the training and calibration as a roadblock to facilitating constituent complaints.
So just a quick question before you go on to that. So is this gonna basically put more pressure on officers? So just basically if someone can come out, like my neighbor leaves a dog out, a barking noise, like call them. So this is kind of gonna up their kind of workload with noise complaints now that this new law is like in place. And
I would say I think they're already responding to noise complaints, this will allow them to do it more effectively and hopefully efficiently. Cause I can tell you, they're already responding to this.
oh, I know.
Um,
But I was just wondering how, like,
I wouldn't anticipate that it ups their workload.
You have a question? Yeah, here.
Okay.
Councilmember
Yep.
Middleton.
There's a section Q on there.
Definition Q,
Sorry, I meant to say definition Q. A real property boundary shall mean, do you know what that means when it's by that? Let me explain that. No, it says real property boundary shall mean an imaginary line exterior to any structure along the ground surface, which separates the real property owned by the one person from what is owned from another person, and the vertical extension of such line.
I think that just means the property lines, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know how much thought is given to a GIS map of boundary delineation. I mean, I think more often than not, when they're responding to a complaint, it's normally at an articulable residence. Certainly if you wanted to give that more clarity, you know, you could. As far as a GIS tax parcel number.
I think it's a reference to 292.13.
Okay.
So that's,
Yeah, I'm not sure how often. There's a question of, you know, any noise transmuting itself over numerous boundary lines.
Maybe more clarity on that. And then there's V, it says unnecessary, I think we talked about that one too. Unnecessary noise means any excessive or unusual loud sound or any sound which either annoys, disturbs, injures, endangers the comfort, repose, health, peace, and safety of a reasonable person of normal sensibilities, or which causes injury to an animal. I guess it's just kind of. So that's just anything, it's kind of.
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, you mean me?
Well, I think that
Let her-
just defines what. Particularly, you know, could be described as, you know, unreasonable noise or unnecessary noise.
How do we
And
know what, like,
they have the 11 factors that are to be considered whether something would constitute unnecessary noise, and I think, you know, certainly if council's uncomfortable with that level of discretion or those factors, you know, we'd welcome any suggestions as to how to correct that language or how to make, you know, add in something that might make this more clear.
So Councilmember Porter asks, and I apologize for missing this question. So are we limiting permits now so that the ordinance can be enforced?
Now that the.
Now,
ordinance-
no, it's still are voting for this now, so the ordinance can be enforced.
I think the reference is to generators. I think that's the only thing that's relevant to permits.
Are you talking about special permits or? I don't want to answer the wrong questions and that. I'm just
Do you
not
want
sure.
some clarification? Councilman reporter, maybe if you wanna put in the chat just to clarify exactly which
What kind of
what
permits?
permits you're talking about.
And so just
Also,
another,
the YouTube stream is on a delay, so if he's
Oh.
watching and engaging it on YouTube, that's why.
yeah, it's still, yeah, it's delayed. I can see, I've moved my,
Sorry.
yeah, it's like behind.
I'll
See,
keep
you're
my-
still stiff.
I'll keep my eye on
Yeah, it's
this.
weird, that's weird. Okay. So, and also, like, with Binghamton properties being so close, like, how do we, like, what is like the practical? It's back to the GSI question, like with the GIS question, with it being so close, like.
In reference to what kind of sound?
Mhm.
In reference to
The
the
real-
real property.
The real property boundary, with it being so close, yeah,
Like, how might someone know what their real
property value, boundary is, yeah, with everything so close, like, I don't know where the pin is in my yard.
I mean, this is an illegal premise, but like typically, you know, the boundary of your residence or wherever you happen to be living or where you are. I mean, you know, whether there's a fence or another house, I mean,
Driveway, yeah. It's like
the road, the sidewalk, you know. But again, if that. If council feels like that needs to be more clearly defined, that's certainly. You know, this is just a jumping off point to get something in everybody's line of sight, you know, and certainly if anybody's uncomfortable with any language. Collaboration is key, you know.
I know Robert's saying something, but I just want to read this part. It's Article 2, 29-4. No person shall make, continue, or cause to permit to be made any unnecessary noise. The following acts are declared to be prima facie evidence of a violation of this article and are prohibited, but said enumeration shall not be deemed to be excessive. Yeah, so that's like kind of like too open, like I feel like.
So that refers back to the unnecessary noise definition and those 11 factors.
Okay.
Um,
Can we,
Councilmember Kavanaugh mentioned, what are thoughts on the hours? I think we are moving to 9 PM for this to kick in. Personally, I think that's too early.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a consideration for potentially weekday versus weekend, you know. As far as the hours too, I mean, everybody's different too, you know.
so what
I go to
about,
bed early.
so like just the, let's see, it was like, say me and my neighbor don't get along. And they keep calling and saying I'm making noise that I'm not making, like, how does an officer like deem that? Or does he just go with what the person says and not really, like, if I'm saying I'm not doing this, or.
Yeah, so under, like, I'm operating like you're asking about this proposed law.
Mhm.
They'd have to use these 11 factors if when they responded to the call. I mean, I think it would just depend on the situation, so. If they call, if noise can be heard during the call, if then they respond, depending on what they see or hear, the hour, I mean, all the ambient facts would have to be considered.
So all 11 before they can issue a ticket?
No, I think it's including but not limited to.
I just wanted to, Councilmember Porter clarified, his question, so he was saying, basically, are we going to limit permits such as Juneteenth, Able's, et cetera, so that this noise ordinance can be enforced?
Yeah, and like we said before, I think that's just something that,
It
you know,
was,
council has to consider.
Every year.
Exception for existing special permits and how they want to handle. The clerk and or council want to handle that issue going forward.
I don't see any council questions, so if I may ask a clerk.
Yeah, sure.
Which is one concern I think our office has whenever something gets changed in one of these ordinances, and this is for council as well, is like around public education. So the public has a certain set of understandings, but they don't go and read the charter all the time, right? So I guess I'm wondering if there's a way to legally account for building in some sort of grace period, or if from the mayor's office, we can make an effort toward public education, officer training,
Yeah.
whether it's our office and your office collaborating, because I know like with insurance even, right, like that was a huge thing where people came in with event permits, their insurance, we hadn't been able to communicate the change. Of course, we make every effort to update the website and stuff like that, but I would just implore council about like an educational component to this.
I definitely.
Well, certainly, I mean, council could contemplate like a town hall meeting regarding it, or you could mention it at your monthly, community meetings. And bring a copy of it, get some feedback from constituents along with whatever feedback you guys have received, thus far.
And our office could work with the media to try to get the word out, as we do when other initiatives pass. The website, like you said, we could put it on social media. Yeah.
Thank you.
And you could also consider holding a public hearing.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
This, though, is modeled just from, it's not modeled based off resident feedback per se, it's modeled based off Syracuse.
Yeah, and I think it's in response to a number of complaints that the mayor's office had been receiving regarding unreasonable noise in their neighborhoods. And, when looking to our prior ordinance, noise ordinance, we had, looked throughout the state to maybe a better, a more modern way forward. But like I said, open to feedback.
Thank you.
I was just looking at this, we got something in from a constituent. I was just looking at that. Do we want to read that for the record or no? Okay.
I'm sorry, it's local law.
Okay.
It was an ordinance.
Okay.
It was originally an ordinance, then it was a local law.
Okay.
Just to clarify the record there, it's the lawyer.
Councilmember Matavetsky asks, she's watching, but, can't comment for some reason. But what about babies and such who cry with tight housing? Their noise may fall into the real property light issue.
I think it would still fall under this, like the 11 factors and the,
Or is there, if there's a certain section she's looking at?
I think she's still referring to that real property boundary definition issue.
because it's not just that you can hear the noise across the real property boundary. I don't believe it's just that the noise is kind of meeting those thresholds across the real boundary. The real
That is
property.
defined as unnecessary still.
Right.
Well, yeah, and the real property boundary tends to refer to like the use of sound reproduction devices.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that would fall under like unnecessary noise and the 11 factors. So that's why I was asking what section she was referring to, because I don't know that it applies to 292.13.
Let's see if
My house would probably be top of the complaint list if that was the case, the crying baby, so.
You'll get a break for 15 days, I put you.
up
Councilmember,
to 15.
Councilmember Porter asked, would this affect the stadium, or is that a special issue? Stadium like with fireworks. Just other noise in the stadium.
So there is an exception for city government, but they're not technically enforced, they're not technically city employees.
That's a good question.
I guess another question from the clerk's office as a point of curiosity would be, there's a reference to a filing fee that we would collect for a special permit, but it's not 100% clear who would set that fee.
Where's that, Sarah?
That's right, it's under
22,
22,
6.
bullet 6.
I have some questions. Are they,
Before, yeah, do you mind if I go? to
yeah,
that?
do that, yeah, do them and I'll go after.
Any thoughts on the filing fee?
No, I think if it's found to be ambiguous, you could clarify that.
Yeah, we can just.
I mean, a lot of this stuff isn't like. This is just what we're proposing based on Syracuse, but I don't purport to be the expert on noise ordinances, so. We're getting I'm getting a lot of questions, but I mean, I think if we could come up with solutions,
Sure,
that would be maybe my suggestion.
or maybe just like,
And
I
we
guess
can
like,
just put it into the fee schedule, or something like that, that gets voted on by council.
Well, not just that, like I mean, this is just a starting off point for a discussion on a better way forward.
okay,
And certainly Megan and I don't purport to be experts on
of course.
the best noise law to pass in the city of Binghamton, so. I think if we can be solutions based, that's always my
So-
question.
I got a comment and a question, actually, yeah. So this needs, from Councilmember Dunn, this needs more work as far as I am concerned. The ambiguous parts of this law will cause more problems than it will help or benefit the residents of the city. And then from Councilmember Kavanaugh, is there a method to issue a corporate citation for this sort of law? For example, a construction company starting jackhammering at 6 a.m. or a refuse hauler dropping a dumpster at 5 a.m. day after day. I wouldn't want to target the labor or the driver, but rather the company that sent them.
We could certainly look into that. Like I just said, I mean, I think a lot of this is really good food for thought, and I think it's just. If we can collaborate and be solutions based and add in things that make sense, take out things that don't.
Yeah, I think going through this, like and kind of on to like what Mike says, I feel like this kind of needs some more like detailed, and that's what you're saying, that we can work together to do that. First, I think a lot of it is kind of vague, and I'm worried about just like people having issues with someone and like constantly calling. I don't want it to add in more of a issue, and just like with apartments, like and a baby crying, like just certain things. I know that this is not in here, but I feel like it should be like not so vague, so then that way when it's enforced, it's like this is what it was, rather than like an officer making a general statement on, or a general synopsis on it, even though there are 11 things
Yeah.
here. I just feel like it's still kind of, to me, like looking at it, it's still kind of vague, like.
No, and we certainly, laws that are vague make for bad law, right? So I
Yes.
think if there's clarity that needs to be added, like I
Yes.
said, I mean, the way to get it to the table is through this RL process.
Yes.
And I think, we're just trying to address constituent complaints and make this more workable for everybody involved in the process. So, I mean, if you'd be willing to spearhead it, we
Sure.
can start sharing a Word version and making edits, and
Sure.
if I can make you the point person for
Sure.
council, and council
Sure.
can filter all their questions
Yes, of
through.
course, and I'll ask, and I'll come and ask you guys to.
And let's
That's
get a
fine.
working Word copy.
Yeah,
going.
that's fine. Yeah, because it's just like, it's such, noise is like so complex. It's like a really complex issue, and I don't want it, like, I understand why we have it. I understand why, but I just am worried about when it enforces, it's gonna cause so many other issues, like long-term, if it's vague, like. A vague thing. So,
Yeah, I think to that point that everyone just made, Councilmember Dunn said, let's do it right the first time. We can do this to benefit our residents and their quality of life.
of course.
Sorry, not to again, but one more thing from the clerk's office.
Okay.
No, and Mike, I agree. That's my motto. Do it once, do
Yeah,
it
that's
right.
yeah, that's
you know?
right, yeah, then
So-
that's better, correct.
Add to the list of things to think through. Currently, noise permits and special noise permits live in different parts of the law, because noise permits refer to private property owners who apply for a permit where they wouldn't need an event permit because it's on their own private property. But I wonder if there's a way to like streamline this, again, in the interest of like public education and just making our office operations easier, so that we can work that sort of
Like
piece.
consolidating it. into-
Yeah, you know what I mean, instead of
Sure.
noise permits, obviously, there's a difference between a private property noise permit and a public property noise permit, I understand the distinction, but right now they live in like two different areas, but both under.
Yeah, I mean, there's a-
two,
There's a way to pop it into the same section and repeal
Yeah.
that section.
Yeah. so that would be helpful. And then, Councilmember Dunn noted, being on the committee, I can be looped in with Councilmember Middleton, I want to be a part of this being worked on.
Which is fine, yeah, you can,
Sure.
me and Mike will take care of it. Yeah, I think that's kind of,
Yeah, and I think if we can start sharing, a Word document and making some edits that make sense, that moves us towards getting something workable together.
I would say too, we could reach out to Syracuse, you know, I would think that'd be a good idea to hear from them on if they're, you know, they're real world using this, so what's their experience been? Anything else from the chat?
No, did Alumni put anything in, the other
No,
chat?
he switched to.
Okay,
switched over.
okay. Wanna make sure
Anyone else
everyone-
have any other question?
No, I'm actually really glad we had this meeting, so.
Well, and if there's a way to streamline and make this more intuitive for all involved, that's.
Want to get a motion to adjourn from the chat?
Anything else from the chat?
I don't see anything.
I just was checking to see
I don't see
if I got a text
anything.
message.
Great.
Michael makes Councilmember Donovan, excuse me, makes the motion to adjourn.
Look at
Hold
that.
on. Hold on, no, we're not yet.
Okay.
Someone else just sent a message, sent me a message. Yes. Should I call? her?
I also want
Yep,
to know.
call, yeah, I'll call, you want me to call? her?
Yeah,
I'll call
and
her.
just, can you put the speaker, like, can you put your phone
Sure.
near the microphone?
Sure.
If there's feedback, I will
Figure
figure
it
it
out.
out. Yes, sir. It will be a noise issue, guys.
Mhm. Getting a fine now. I do.
Hi, Kenya.
Hi, beautiful. So I have you on speaker. You can, say what you're gonna say.
Oh, okay. Hi, can everyone hear me? I'm walking away from the YouTube so it doesn't,
Yes,
it's delayed.
yes.
So I just kind of wanted to make sure that in this discussion that everyone is aware and, I gotta go upstairs because it's so loud. That city council members have, did reach out to corporation council about noise ordinance stuff dating pretty far back. I'd have to look at my email records.
Mhm.
And I'm interested in understanding how we get the kind of support the mayor's office gets in writing legislation. Because I know at least myself and another member have had discussions with corporation council. And it's just I'm just still not exactly clear how we get these types of things going. And that, we don't just submit ideas and then have to wait for a draft that's driven by the mayor's office. So I wanted to just get that question out there. Obviously, we are all dealing with noise complaints. We have been eager to address this topic. We also obviously deal with complaints from people that are potentially malicious against their neighbors as well. So we kind of get to see both sides of the complaint situation. So I'm glad this is moving forward. I'm glad we're all working together. I wish we would have been looped in sooner. And I'm so that I just want to make sure I throw that out. And in terms of solutions oriented, absolutely we need to be solution oriented. And part of that is pulling together a list of all those questions that we have. So I think that's the first step. And thank you. Sorry about all the sound delay and stuff.
All good. Do you have anything else?
I'm gonna, no, that's the main thing. I just wanted to make sure that it's clear to everyone that there have been council members trying to drive noise ordinance reform for quite a while and have been in conversation with corporation council, which hadn't resulted in these types of leads. So I'm interested in from a process perspective in the future to figure out how we get this similar support that the executive branch gets. Okay, I'm gonna hang up because it's too much sound.
Hold on, Hadassah. Don't hang up yet. Go ahead. What were you gonna say, Megan?
Can you hear me if I speak now?
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah.
I can't, I'm not sure exactly everything you're referring to, but I just wanna say that I think that this draft legislation is sort of a result of that process, and there was a consensus among the administration and council members that the noise ordinance needed to be updated, so. This is like the first step, obviously, and we're, you know, it's good we're having this
Yeah.
meeting to collaborate on it.
I strongly appreciate your acknowledging that, because in watching the YouTube, it sounded the way it was laid out early on, that this was purely a mayoral initiative that was based on some, you know, outside of council, and council's been interested in driving this. So I appreciate that we're all on this, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, for putting that on the record. Appreciate it.
Cool with that. Shall we honor Councilman Dundon's motion to adjourn?
I'll second it.
Cause it's in the chat and he's chilling.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'll second that. Aye.